Great. Well, thank you everybody for staying up this late for a session on security. I'll go a little mild, I hope, with the content I'm going to share with you today. We're going to go hands-on a little bit down in the presentation, and I will not bore you with more details. Just to introduce myself, I'm Anna. I'm currently working as a developer advocate for Java at Oracle. And it's my pleasure to talk to you about JDK tools, but today it's going to be just a specific set that can help you with looking into the security of your applications. And I'm going to share with you some techniques on how you can use those tools for most of the time troubleshooting and looking at your application's security. And as the title says, well, we're going to use JDK Flight Recorder, JDK Mission Control, JFR Security Events, and a little more. So let's dive in. Before going into the action, a bit recap on JDK Flight Recorder events, what they are, what they do, and so on. So when running a Java application, probably many of you have profiled it and used JFR to collect events that occur in the JVM. And it's great because JFR can help us, and JFR events can help us understand what's going on, both with our application, but also the underlying JDK that is built upon. And most importantly, for profiling, we store that data in a .jfr file. So that's what JDK Flight Recorder is helping us mainly. And each JFR event has as components, like in a big window, if we're looking at it, a few things, like an event ID, a timestamp, a duration, thread ID, stack trace ID, and some event-specific payload that varies based on event. But most importantly, when we are gathering this information in the JFR file, it's important that that JFR file contains also metadata information describing on how we can interpret those events. So this means it also holds data necessary for resolving those events and for interpreting preceding events. It's not more just a dump of events. And specific to security, well, there are a few events that are concerning security. So there are 6 events. And what you see here in the table, they are in the order that they were introduced in the JDK. So starting with JDK 12, there are 4 security events. That's 4 JFR security events that are disabled by default in the shipped configurations for JFR, the default.jfc and profile.jfc that you can probably see in your JDK locally and remotely. And so they are disabled by default, but you can enable them. As they are important, they also were backported to the LTS versions of the vendors, hopefully. I can vouch here for Oracle, hence why you see that Oracle JDK version there. And in their order, security property modification is looking into the security properties that dynamically modify when you're using your application. Throughout the course of your application, security properties can change, and those can then be dynamically changed thanks to the methods of method of security set property, and that has 2 values like string key and string value. Then there's another one that looks into the successful TLS handshakes, and those successful TLS handshakes that succeed are being recorded and can be recorded with JDK TLS handshake once you have enabled it. Similar for successful validation of X509 certificates, we have X509 validation, and X509 certificate gets information about the certificate itself, and we're going to see which information. Now, later down the road in JDK 20, there were 2 other events that were brought up to the JFR events fauna, to say so. So first of all, it's JDK.initial security property that, as the name it says, it tells you the initial security properties for your application. And this one is the only one that's enabled by default from these 6. And another one that looks at the security providers that are being accessed throughout your application lifetime. That are being recorded with JDK security provider service. And you can have the backports there as well, because it was in 20, 17, 11, and 8 followed for them. Now, let's jump into action. And we have a local demo. Of course, with a Spring Boot application running with JDK 23, we're going to play tic-tac-toe, hopefully at the end of the session, because I need your help to demonstrate the last part of the tools in actions. And we have a typical mutual TLS authentication in this case. So I have my application running on HTTPS. It has a set of certificates inside it, but also me as a client, I need to authenticate and tell the application that, hey, it's me that wants to access you. I'm enabled to access you. And of course, I'm going to furthermore look into deploying this into the cloud. Hence why I enabled another DNS when I'm going to deploy it in a container, for example. And the container, I just said, OK, be Spring Boot. So that's why you see the name Spring Boot here, so that that local host, that host is also being cleared with a certificate. So let's look at tic-tac-toe. So going to the IDE, I have a typical Spring Boot app with the tic-tac-toe application here and some code. It's not going to be very interesting for this presentation, but the code was shared at the end, don't worry. And for security reasons, well, I checked the server port to be 8443, not the traditional 8080. Because I want to collect some metrics about my application, I am using also Prometheus, so I enabled the export of those metrics. And for security reasons, I also went for configuring SSL bundles. So what this means is, like, starting, I think, Spring 3.2, you can configure SSL bundles where you can state where your key store is located, what's the password to get access to that key store, what's the key store type, and so on and so forth. This is a much more, let's say, unified way to look into security with Spring Boot. So I use this approach. The first part is for, I would say, concerning server side. The second part is concerning more handling the mutual TLS with myself as a client. OK, so that's pretty much the application. Let's look into it. And maybe I want to see the security properties. So if I want to see the security properties of a Java application, I'm going to go here in its properties, look at the VM properties. One way to do it is by enabling, by launching it with Java security debug equals properties. So this is going to tell me my initial security properties as well, this flag. But starting with JDK 22, there is another one called xshowSettings. Oh, the IDE helps me. xshowSettings security. So this flag can also tell you about the security properties that your application is using. And there's a valid question. What's the difference between the two? Well, as the first one kind of says with debug, it will be more verbose in information about your security properties than the second one that was going to give you more succinct information. That's it. Now, if I want to capture also TLS, I have options. So I can also add this, -d javax.net.debug SSL handshake. OK, so this one helps me to debug the SSL handshake. Why do I do this? Because I briefly said earlier, the JDK TLS handshake kind of looks into the successful TLS handshake. So for example, there's a failed one. The logs might have some information about it, while the event might not capture it. OK, so let's do this, and let's apply. OK. Yeah, let's run the application. OK, so we already see here that I have some initial security properties, and probably if I go to the browser and make some access to my application, I'm going to see a TLS handshake in logs. But logs can become verbose. And maybe I have better ways to look at this. So better ways to look at it and just get the events and maybe correlate them with information and other metrics in Prometheus is by just going and using JFR. But I already started my application. So what do? Well, first of all, let me just make sure that I'm running Java 23, the latest Java version. So I'm going to use JFR to make my own profile configuration and say Java home bin JFR configure in here and say JDK dot, because this one is not enabled by default, security property modification. So if I am changing any security property, that will be recorded here. And I need to enable it, so I need to do the DS thing, enabled with true. OK. configuration written to custom.gfc. I didn't have this before. So what JFR did, it took the default.gfc and made a copy of it. But for the sake of this demo, because I enabled the security property modification, it put it to true as well. So right now, if I'm looking to my security properties, I have initial security property initialized with true, security property modification with true, and I want to just see everything. So I'm just going to enable everything now that I have this lovely profile here for validation and for things. Great, but I already started my application. So how do I profile it? Well, I don't want to restart it. I'm going to be lazy. So I'm just going to clear this. And since this is my local, I can search for the process of it and just take this ID from here. I use JPS to find the LLVM ID and use jcmd to start, JFR.start a recording for this one. So I can say start, and I can say settings, custom.jfc, my previously modified configuration. Duration, well, I want to make sure that I'm recording this, so 120 seconds. File name, I'm just going to go with rec.jfr. Let's see if I have it here. No, I don't have it defined, thanks. So let's hope that this works. Okay, recording 1 is starting to write. Let's access the application. Where are you, application? Okay, you're here. Let's make you bigger. Let's go to a private window and localhost 8443. Oh, I already have the certificate, my client certificate, loaded in the browser. So what my application is going to say, hey, I detected that. So the browser is going to say, hey, I have the certificate that can work with this application. Do you want to send it over? Yes, I would like to send it over. Now I have access to the app. And now I want to play. Oh, I just started the app, so I cannot play. Let's register. Very secure password. Probably you can already find out which password I used here, given the 3 letters from my username. Don't do this. So now I can sign in, and again, I get a check and an ask of the certificate. The reason why I'm unchecking this and letting you to see the number of times this appears has a reason. So I'm going to say, OK. OK, I'm just going to play a little bit. I won, even though I didn't pay attention. So somebody told me that this is not a very, very smart game, so we can easily win. Some people were upset that they couldn't win that fast. OK, so let me go back to the IDE and see how my rec.jfr is doing. I set it to be 2 minutes. I have to wait for 1 more minute to be done. So I'm recording for 2 minutes. It has to be a little bit more. I have to wait a little bit to be done on this one. Come on. And a bit for it to write to the disk. Could have played a little bit more tic-tac-toe and had more fun. Okay. Come on. Demo gods. I wrote the right thing, right? Reload from disk. Oh yeah, I have things. Thank you, demo gods. So now I have rec.jfr. And before importing it in JMC and look at it there because it's a nice tool, I can actually inspect it very nicely with JFR itself. How? Let me show you. So for example, if I want to inspect what TLS version I used, I can look into this by using JFR print command, --events, let's say for TLS. So I can do this, even regular expressions, rec.jfr, and there's some stuff here. Let me make this bigger. So remember that I said OK twice in the browser? I kind of recorded that for each of those acceptances when the handshake occurred. That was recorded here. So these are 2 different events captured here for TLS handshake. And usually when I'm deploying on a remote location, the peer host has the name of the host that you're deploying on, peer port usually the port that is accessible there. And probably the most important part, the protocol version that was used when doing the handshake is 1.3. Now, this is pretty important to supervise and look at the Java application. As with each Java JDK release, you kind of see that cipher suits are deemed not so safe anymore, and they become either disabled or legacy. So it's actually a good way to keep an eye on what cipher suits your application is using in the TLS handshakes. And a way to do that and to expect that is by catching this lovely event. Let's go to the application itself. And maybe it would be good to go to the next level and see how it behaves into the cloud. So if I want to deploy this into its cloud version, what I would do, I think I would use a Docker file, which I have it here. I'm using Glink to pack only the necessary for the cloud. And then with my custom Java runtime that only has the necessary for my application, I'm just using the tic-tac-toe jar and sending it over. And I'm also exposing a port 1099 because I want to be able to connect remotely via JMX to my application. And some JDK Java options to make sure that, well, I can add things to my running application when I am going to have it in my toolchain and I'm going to build it and deploy it. Unlike other times, I'm not going to use Kubernetes. I'm going to use just Docker Compose. So I'm taking my Docker file. My container name is Spring Boot, very important for my certificate, as it knows this is a valid DNS. And I'm using for the flight recording, I want to record actually continuously while I'm there. So I'm going to use my custom.jfc in the profile and start the flight recording. The max age of the things recorded must be 5 minutes, so it's going to be refreshed after 5 minutes. And in case my application is dying, the recording is going to be dumped while it dies. Now, I have that 1099 access to my application via JMX, but I want to do it securely, so I want to have a secure access to that. The way to do that is by actually going and setting the JMX remote access using a file with the users that are authorized to access that location. And in my case, let me see, remote access. It's admin and user with their permissions as well, read, write, and read only. Now, when it comes to JMC, it's good to have a read-write user. And for the other part, well, you need to tell these users and the passwords. And usually these passwords are not in clear. Now, the Java RMI server hostname, also important. You can override this once you're deploying at a remote location. And of course, a location for the key store and the trust store. Well, locally, I know where they are. But I also want to give them for remote. So I'm going to attach them as volumes going forward and override them per need in each environment where I'm deploying. Just changing here, because I'm using custom.jfc as the reference profile for JFR. I'm adding the key stores as well, the stores, the remote access, again, files. I'm going to use the same ports as on local 8443 and 1099. And of course, I'm going to just also connect to Prometheus so that I can export the metrics to Prometheus too while I'm still doing this. So let me make this bigger. Let's test it on local first. So first of all, Docker compose up -- build. And now I'm going to depend on the lovely internet here, hoping that is going good. And this is going to start, it's going to build my application with the Docker file I gave it. And if everything goes fine, amazing, I can go again to my browser. But before going again to my browser and playing again, I would like to profile my application using JMC. Now, JMC, I used to be connected to this local host before, so it knows that I'm there, and you can see the 1 and the infinite in the parentheses. I cannot make this bigger. There are some accessibility things that need to be changed with JMC. But you have to trust me, there's a 1 with infinite in the parentheses regarding my recording. So this means that it's a continuous recording running on process 1 in the container. So JMC sees it. But if you're wondering how I got to do this, Well, I use the connect button, create a new connection, local host, because I'm running at local host right now, 1099. And let me see, admin, because it has read-write, pass 1, test the connection. OK, it's OK. Started flight recording. And yeah, so if I did the flight recording in the back, like with shorter flight recording for profiling only, not the infinite one, I had this this there. So I have my profile with a lot of security things. Now, unlike the other one that's continuous, this is going to be just 1 minute. But with the continuous one, if you're connected to somewhere remotely, you can also say dump whole recording, dump last part of the recording. So you can also have access to the remote one too. But let's go and say localhost 8443 to the local. OK, I'm going to do the same dance as before. Now, just to show you that's a new instance, restart it, doesn't know who's Anna. Gonna save it, go again. Now, in this case, I think the recording is going to be only 60 seconds, which is great, because we don't have that much time, right? Maybe let's play a little more. OK. 81%. And I'm faster than the recording itself. Maybe I should have dumped things. But then dumping would probably take a little longer. So, yes, it worked. Let's go and look into the recording. Actually, the event browser. And in the event browser, I can filter for security. And again, I have my 47 initial security events. That for each security property, there's an event captured there. No security property modification, so I don't dynamically change security settings, security properties at runtime. But I kind of invoked a lot of times my security provider. So there were a lot of matches for the best provider that is available in my JDK. Although I played just a little bit. And then TLS handshake, there was just one. Interesting. Let's see with the certificates, X509. So for the certificate validation, because there's just one TLS handshake that was caught, it captured only the validation in the chain of certificates for one time of the certificate there. So even that there appears like 2 entries, it's a validation in the, each entry means a validation in the certificate chain when it gets to the server side. Now, another thing, I get some information on the certificate that I have here. So information on what I have on the server, for my certificates on the server. So this is what's concerning servers. And this is my one custom one, the one of my client. And the way I know it is because it has the common name Anna. So that's how I identify it. It's me, the client, in there. So all these informations are captured by the JFR events. And I think the most important one regarding certificates is always to look since when they're valid until they're valid. Also the length of the key, because sometimes some keys on the certificates are deemed as not secure anymore. So you always need to keep an eye on how great you're doing with that, even though that certificate might be valid. So there are a few important things that you can capture here and correlate furthermore. So now it's going to go to the important part where I'm going to need you. So how do you move this forward to the cloud? So it works on local, it's great. And I can do a JMX connection via JDK Mission Control, and that's amazing. However, it's a little bit like you're jumping through a lot of hoops to get access to those events. And the file can grow a lot. So until JDK 16, that was pretty much the way that we were looking at gathering these events that occur within our JVM. But since JDK 16, we can transfer these recorded events programmatically as they occur over the network using, for example, MBean server connection. Well, this is because JDK Flight Recorder has also a rich structured API that can stream events. So what I mean by MBean server connection, well, look at the example here. So in this case, let's imagine that we have an application that's already running with GMX, but we cannot modify it to like stream the events from it, but we can still access it through GMX. So we can make our own connection to the application thanks to MBean server connection. And then we can do a remote recording of the events that are there and take them further and maybe expose them to Prometheus further from that application. Now, that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to stream JFR events actively within the process. So what this means, like in the case of my application, to have, let's say, a startup, to say, hey, when you start, I want to get access to the metrics registry. So this is the usual metrics registry that I can have access to. As for other metrics that I can add to export to Prometheus as well. And then I can just try and see if I can open the event stream and the repository of the event stream and catch the events that I'm interested in. And when an event is being recorded, I want to put that in, let's say, counters, timers, gauges, whatever it makes sense in terms of saying that metrics further to Prometheus and give it a meaning. And these kind of things can be further correlated with what's going on in your infrastructure. So getting information from your security details and correlate it further with what you have in your infrastructure is essential. And just by that. Now, be careful on how many of these you're going to catch, because they might have some impact on your application. I didn't test it with many events, but I'm assuming at some point if you catch too many, there will be something if you're doing like this programmatically. So the demo has evolved now. I deployed in the cloud. I'm using Podman Compose for that, running in a VM instance. And I can even get information from my application. I can access it as a player. I can use the monitoring tools in my container. I can even get suggestions on what I can improve on my flags of application from Java Management Service. So a lot of things can be done in the cloud, and it's pretty cool. But for the last part, I need you. So this, if you're going to scan this, you should access the tic-tac-toe application, which is deployed on a server. And I'm using a self-signed certificate. So please, when it's going to warn you that's probably not unsafe, it's because it's a self-signed certificate. So please trust me, it's not a malware. And just play some tic-tac-toe for me so that we can look at some things together further and I can connect things for you. I'm just checking myself too. You can never be too sure that it works. So yeah, just play it for a bit. I hope that everybody gets to scan this, because I need to move to the browser a bit. Okay. Go here. So that's my remote, unprotected Prometheus instance, I know, where I can look for the metrics of what you have done so far. So because I exported actively the events while you were playing games, I think I have the JDK TLS handshake total, which is a counter exported from my application. Let's say for a graph, not 1 hour. Last, I think 1 minute is enough. So there was like a plateau when things started, maybe 5 minutes to show it to you. So there was a plateau because nobody was playing online. And once you started to play, the TLS handshake started to occur more and more and got to be recorded. But also, if you want to look into how many times a certain certificate has been used, or you want to identify the types of certificates that your clients are using when going through your application, you can collect that from the certificate details, X509 certificates, for example. This is mine. I exported that one as well, so there were a lot of certificates on the server side that were being validated and accepted. Now, I'm talking a lot about security and stuff that you can export, and you can see sensitive things about that. But one thing that I want to tell you is, like, if by mistake you have exported something that it's not that, that shouldn't be seen. There's also another nice command that you can use with JFR, and I mentioned this yesterday in my talk, and it's called JFR scrub. So you can run this over an existing file where you know that you have some sensitive data, and it can scrub that file of that specific sensitive data that you have there. Now you're going to ask yourself, but if I'm streaming events, how am I going to do that? Well, when you're streaming events, you as a developer have a responsibility to filter on those specific parts that you think that might contain sensitive data. So as that is done programmatically by you, me, and others, that's something that comes on our shoulders. And I want to thank you for playing tic-tac-toe with me and for staying a little bit overboard. This is where you find the slides of the stock. It's going to be way more than I had here. But it's a more in words part and more readable in case you forget the demos. The demos you can always revisit, but I think that some parts are good to be written as well. Thank you very much for joining me. If you have questions, we can talk afterwards. And yes, enjoy DevOps. And I'm looking forward to your feedback and also to your questions and talking to you more. There are a few things that I couldn't fit that much in the nervousness of the presentation, but I'm looking forward to tell you more on those. Or you can find me at the Oracle booth in the upcoming days, and we can talk more about security, JDK tools, and other stuff that are awesome in Java. Thank you.
All systems are nominal. Initialize Genesis